All right, let's dive right in, shall we? Nietzsche. We're tackling Nietzsche today. You sent over some seriously fascinating stuff about his ethics.
Oh, yeah. He's a big deal. I mean, when you have folks like Bernard Williams calling him one of the most important moral philosophers, like, of recent times, you gotta pay attention, right?
No, totally. But Nietzsche, he doesn't just kind of tear down those existing moral systems, does he? It's more like he gives this whole new view on what it means for humans to thrive.
You got it.
Yeah.
Especially for these higher types, as he called them.
Higher types, huh? That's already got me intrigued. I'm seeing terms like death of God, revaluation of all values, even something called eternal recurrence.
Oh, yeah, you're in for a ride. This is definitely going to be a philosophical roller coaster. But hey, it's a fun one, I promise.
I'm ready. But let's start with this whole death of God thing. I mean, is he literally saying God is dead, end of story?
Well, not exactly. It's more like he's pointing out this massive cultural shift. For centuries, right? Morality was rooted in, like, divine authority. But as traditional religious belief declined, well, that whole foundation started to crumble.
Like the ground beneath our feet, our moral ground just kind of shook.
Exactly, like a philosophical earthquake. And you'd think, okay, now we need new ways to justify our morals. Secular ones, maybe?
Makes sense, right? Find a new foundation.
But even then, Nietzsche was suspicious. He thought even those secular moralities, the ones based on reason or human nature, they were still clinging to, like, remnants of those supernatural ideas they were trying to get away from.
Like a phantom limb. Morality's gone, but we still feel it. Okay, so he's really challenging those basic assumptions.
Oh, absolutely. And that's just the beginning. He doesn't hold back one of his first targets, the whole idea of moral agency. Like, he even argued that free will is a self-contradiction, more like a product of human pride than actual reality.
Whoa, slow down. If we don't have free will, what's guiding our actions then? Are we just like puppets on strings?
Well, Nietzsche believed our actions are largely determined by unconscious drives and instincts, which, was a pretty radical idea for his time. But it raises this huge question, right? If we're not actually in control, how can we be held morally responsible?
It makes you rethink, like, everything. Our justice system, everyday judgment.
Right, like our conscious mind, the me we think we are, maybe isn't the one calling the shots. And then from there, Nietzsche questions the content of morality itself. Like, one example is his view on pity.
Pity?
Yeah.
You mean like compassion, helping those in need? I mean, isn't that a good thing?
Well, it seems like it, right? But Nietzsche had this very specific view of pity. He argued that constantly dwelling on suffering, like pity often does, could actually be weakening, like it fostered mediocrity and held back those who were, capable of greatness. And this is where that will to power idea comes in.
Ah, will to power. A phrase I've heard but never fully grasped. Is it about, like, ruthless ambition, survival of the fittest, that kind of thing?
Not quite. It's more fundamental. Think of it as this force in all living things, pushing them toward growth, self-expression, overcoming obstacles. Not necessarily about dominating others, but about reaching your full potential.
So too much pity, in a way, holds us back from that individual striving.
That's one way to put it. It's about finding the right balance, right? Helping others, but also becoming your best self. And this connects to his critiques of things like utilitarianism and socialism, too.
Utilitarianism. Now, how does that fit in?
Well, he saw those philosophies, with their emphasis on the well-being of the herd as potentially hindering exceptional individuals, those higher types we talked about earlier.
So he's pushing us to think about how we balance the individual and the community.
Absolutely. But there's more. Nietzsche also had this fascinating method he called genealogy. Basically, he dug into the history of our moral beliefs to figure out their true origins.
Like digging up a family tree. But for morals.
Exactly. And he found two contrasting systems. Master morality, which valued strength, nobility, achieving great things, and then slave morality, which emphasized humility, meekness, and even resentment.
Master versus slave morality. That sounds like a recipe for some serious conflict.
Oh, it definitely was. Nietzsche argued there was this slave revolt in morality where essentially the values of the oppressed became the dominant ones. It's like a historical power struggle playing out in the realm of values.
So the morals we often take for granted, they might have some pretty less than noble origins.
That's the idea. And it raises another question, right? If we understand these potentially unsavory roots, does that make us question their hold on us?
It makes you wonder if we really believe these things or if we just inherited them without thinking, like finding out that family heirloom was stolen.
Perfect analogy. And Nietzsche doesn't stop there. He digs even deeper into the psychology of morality, trying to uncover hidden motives behind even seemingly moral actions.
Okay, so we're going down the rabbit hole here. What kind of hidden motives is he talking about?
Well, he argued even acts of kindness could be driven by, say, a desire for power, or as he called it, benevolent revenge. Like, we might comfort someone not just out of genuine concern, but also to, ease our own discomfort at seeing them suffer.
So it's not truly selfless. It's more like, help them so I feel better.
He's pushing us to be more honest with ourselves about our motivations, why we do what we do.
Man, Nietzsche doesn't pull any punches. Free will, pity, now our own motives. It's a lot to take in.
And this is just the beginning. We've looked at his critiques, but next we'll explore his alternative vision. How can humans actually flourish?
All right, so Nietzsche. He's given us a lot to think about, hasn't he? All those critiques of traditional morality. It's heavy stuff. But I'm really curious about this other side, his vision for human flourishing, especially for those higher types. It's like, okay, we've torn things down. So what's he want to build in their place?
That's the exciting part. Nietzsche wasn't all doom and gloom. He actually offered a totally different way to think about, living a truly meaningful life. One that embraces all the good and the bad. And yet, his focus is on those higher types. But remember, it's not about social status or anything.
Right. We talked about that earlier. It's more about, like, certain inner qualities, this potential for greatness that, well, it can show up in different ways depending on the time and place. Right?
You got it. Think about figures like Martin Luther King Jr. or Marie Curie, even someone like Elon Musk. People who, they pushed boundaries, challenged the status quo, and made a real impact. They weren't necessarily seeking power over others, but they had this drive, this inner force.
I can see how those folks might fit into Nietzsche's idea of higher types. But what does this flourishing actually look like? I mean, you mentioned autonomy earlier.
Yeah.
But isn't that just another word for freedom?
Well, not exactly. Nietzsche's idea of autonomy, it's a bit deeper. It's not just about having choices. It's about this deep self-mastery. Imagine someone with a really strong, unified sense of purpose, where their drives and desires are all aligned, working together. That's the kind of autonomy he had in mind.
So it's not about just following every whim, but more like bringing all those parts of yourself together, like an orchestra where all the instruments are playing in harmony.
Perfect analogy. And Nietzsche actually contrasted this with Socrates, who he saw as like a tyrant of reason. He thought Socrates let reason dominate and kind of suppress all those other drives, creating this imbalance.
So true autonomy is about finding that balance where all those aspects of yourself are in sync. Sounds pretty tough to achieve. Can you even consciously try to become more autonomous, or are you just kind of born with it?
That's something even Nietzsche scholars debate. Nature versus nurture, right? Can you will yourself to become autonomous? It seems like Nietzsche thought it was a mix of both. Like, you need the potential, the raw material, but then you got to cultivate it too.
And this all connects back to that will to power idea, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We talked about how it's not just about dominating others, but about self-mastery, pushing yourself, striving to reach your potential. But I still wonder, doesn't this emphasis on individual striving lead to a society where everyone's just looking out for themselves?
It's a valid concern, and Nietzsche definitely wrestled with it too. He wasn't advocating for a dog-eat-dog world or anything. He saw the will to power as something much broader, this creative force. It could fuel your artistic endeavors, your scientific discoveries, even, your love and relationships.
So it's more about striving for excellence, to be your best self, and, well, using that to contribute to the world somehow, whether it's a masterpiece, a cure for a disease, a strong family.
Exactly. And that brings us to another key idea, self-creation.
Self-creation. But wait, didn't he say we don't have free will? How can you create yourself if you're not really free?
It does seem paradoxical, doesn't it? But think about it like sculpting. A sculptor starts with this block of marble, right? Which has its own qualities, but then they use their skills to shape it into something new. In the same way, Nietzsche thought we're not just blank slates. We have certain predispositions, but it's up to us to mold them into something meaningful.
So it's not creating from nothing. It's more like taking what you've got and shaping it into something unique, like realizing your potential.
You got it. It's this process of discovery and, cultivation. You're always striving to become a more refined, a more realized version of yourself. And this leads us to another concept, affirmation.
Affirmation. Is he talking about like those positive self-talk things? I'm good enough. I'm smart enough.
Not quite. Nietzsche's idea is much deeper. It's about saying yes to life. The whole thing, the good, the bad, the joys, the sorrows, embracing it all.
So not pretending everything's perfect,
Yeah.
but accepting reality, even the tough parts.
Exactly. And this connects to one of his most challenging ideas, amor fati, which means love of fate.
Love of fate. That sounds intense. Is he saying we should just passively accept whatever life throws our way?
It's more active than that. It's
Yeah.
about actively embracing everything, what's happened, what's happening, what will happen, even the stuff you'd normally resist.
Okay, that's still a lot to wrap my head around. How can you love the painful parts of life?
Well, it's about recognizing those experiences, however difficult, have made you who you are. It's about finding meaning and value, even in the midst of suffering.
I see. But how does this connect to eternal recurrence, that idea we mentioned earlier?
This is where it gets really wild. Remember, Nietzsche asks us to imagine our lives repeating eternally exactly as they've been. If you could genuinely will that eternal repetition, it would mean you've reached this incredible level of acceptance and affirmation.
Wow, so it's like saying, I wouldn't change a single thing about my life, even the mistakes, the heartbreaks.
It's a radical challenge, right? To the negativity, the life denial that he saw in traditional morality. It's about finding meaning not in some afterlife, but in the reality of existence itself.
So instead of clinging to these old moral codes, Nietzsche wants us to engage in this radical act of self-creation, individually and maybe even as a society.
You got it. We have to confront the death of God, not with fear, but with this sense of creative possibility.
This all makes sense in a way. But it's also, well, pretty daunting. Is this something that's really achievable for, the average person, not just philosophers like Nietzsche?
That's the big question, isn't it? And it's something we'll definitely explore further in the next part of our deep dive.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around all this. Nietzsche's critiques, his vision for flourishing, self-creation, even that amor fati thing. It's a lot.
It is, isn't it? It really makes you think.
But here's the thing that keeps bugging me. If we're ditching those old moral systems, like Nietzsche says, well, what do we replace them with? It's like stepping off a cliff, hoping there's a net, but not really knowing.
That's the big question, right? That's what worried Nietzsche, too. He saw this potential for nihilism, this idea that life's meaningless without, God or objective truth.
It makes sense. You're adrift, your compass is spinning, you don't know which way to go.
But Nietzsche, he didn't want us to despair. He saw this as an opportunity.
An opportunity? Really?
Think about it. If there's no set purpose, no rules from on high, well, we're free to create our own values, define what matters to us. It's scary, but also kind of liberating.
So instead of clinging to those old rules, we become our own moral architects. Figure out what we believe based on, understanding ourselves and the world.
Exactly. That's where the revaluation of all values comes in. Facing the death of God, not with fear, but with a sense of possibility. And that's where the will to power is so important.
Will to power, again. We've talked about how it's not just brute force, but self-mastery, pushing boundaries. But couldn't that lead to a society where it's everyone for themselves?
It's a worry, yeah. But for Nietzsche, the will to power wasn't just self-serving. It was this creative force, this life force that could go in different directions. Art, science, even our relationships.
So it's about striving for excellence, reaching your potential, and then using that to contribute.
Yeah.
Like creating a masterpiece or a scientific discovery or a strong family.
You got it. And that ties back to self-creation, too. Remember, we're all, potential works of art. We have to shape ourselves.
We're all works in progress. I like that. But no objective rules. How do we know what direction to go in? What values should guide us?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. Nietzsche didn't give us a list of rules. Instead, it's this ongoing process. Self-examination, pushing yourself, embracing challenges.
So the journey matters more than the destination. It's not about reaching a fixed point, but constantly becoming more.
Precisely. It takes honesty and courage. It's easy to fall back on, the comfortable beliefs, what society tells us. But Nietzsche wanted us to create our own WN values based on deep understanding.
It makes sense, but man, it's intimidating. Most of us aren't Nietzsche, right? How do we untangle ourselves from those old beliefs and, create something new?
It can feel overwhelming, sure. But he didn't expect us to become super geniuses overnight. We're all shaped by our time and place. The important thing is to start asking the tough questions. Challenge what we take for granted.
So cultivate curiosity, critical thinking, be open to different perspectives.
Exactly, and that applies to how we interact with others, too. Remember, Nietzsche thought truth is multifaceted. There are many perspectives. So dialogue is important. Listening to others even when you disagree.
Especially nowadays with all the echo chambers and, well, demonizing people who think differently. It's important to remember we all have something to contribute, even if we don't see eye to eye on everything.
I completely agree. That openness is key for a society where individuals can actually flourish. And remember, Nietzsche wasn't all about isolated individuals. He thought strong individuals are crucial for a vibrant culture.
It's not about everyone living in their own bubble, but about creating a society where individual growth leads to, like, collective progress,
Yeah.
new ideas, innovation.
Exactly. Individual expression, A&D, collective responsibility. It's a balance. Not always easy.
Well, we've covered a lot today. Critiques, vision for flourishing. It's all challenging stuff, but it makes you think. He pushes us to, like, confront the big questions, take responsibility for our lives, find our own meaning.
And that's his real legacy, I think. That challenge to become more than we are. Embrace life's complexity. Create something meaningful.
So, after all this, what do you think? What stuck with you? What questions are you left with? What new insights are you taking away? As Nietzsche might say, go forth and create yourselves.